This week, too, of a Christmas series titled God the Father. Also, this series is the launch to a much broader study that we'll journey together over the coming months about the Holy Trinity. God the Father during Advent, then preceding Easter during the time of Lent will be God the Son, and then we'll come back at Pentecost and launch a series called God the Spirit. The Trinity is clearly complex theological material, right? Frankly, one that I think is supposed to be somewhat mysterious and undefined. It is likewise one of the hardest concepts to comprehend and explain. And I think sometimes our understanding of this three gods in one, it gets pretty mixed up. It gets pretty confusing. It's almost like sometimes we think if the Holy Trinity was a party, it's like the Old Testament, the God the Father, he'd be the mean old sort of grumpy guy at the party, right? Full of sort of rules and anger, telling everybody to keep it down and stop having so much fun. And then Jesus, he'd show up and he'd be the life of the party, right? I mean, smiling, glowing, and oh, look, he brought a puppy. Isn't that nice? And then the Holy Spirit, I don't know. Maybe that peculiar uncle at the party that we don't talk much about. We just sort of hope he doesn't do anything bizarre and make everyone feel uncomfortable, right? See, I have heard people say this. I think I like the God of the New Testament, but it's the Old Testament God that I just can't seem to buy into. It's almost like somewhere between Malachi and Matthew. In the Bible, it says that there were 400 years of silence when God stopped talking. And like I said, if you were here last week, it's almost like we believe that during that time, God went into therapy and he got better. So you can picture God like sort of laying down on a couch somewhere up in the heavens, right? And him saying something like, I've got to come to grips with these anger issues I have. And these humans, they keep pushing me out to the edge. I don't know why I think God has an Irish accent. I just think he does. See, it's like we believe that the God of the Old Testament is one of anger and wrath and laws and judgment, and the God of the New Testament, Jesus, is one of compassion and love and kindness and forgiveness. But here's the irony, folks, that God has not changed. But truth be told about this story, we go bad on both ends. So, this Christmas, let's let God the Father speak for himself as to who he is and who we are to him. Because I believe that you will see that everything God the Father does is out of love. Last week, I introduced you to what I described as a modern-day parable. If you were here, the story of Pittsburgh police detective, boxing trainer Jack Mook, an unlikely lifelong bachelor. Jack, he rescued and then fostered and then eventually adopted two young boys, Joss and Jesse. I would encourage you to go back online and check that out if you were not able to be here. It's truly an amazing story. And today I want to look at two ancient parables. One, a living parable from the Old Testament, a real person. And then second parable is from the mouth of Jesus. And throughout this series, I told you that I want to take a look at several names of God from the Old Testament, several descriptions of God the Father. And I spoke last week about the very first time that God introduces himself to us. It's back in Genesis 1:1, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And that word God there is this word Elohim. It means a beautiful creator. Then we look briefly at this intimate conversation that God had with Moses. And when Moses asked God, hey, if they ask me, who you are, if they ask me, what is your name, what should I tell them? And God tells Moses, tell them that I am that I am. And that name there is this unique, intimate, personal name, Yahweh, meaning I am present. I am with you. I am for you. And today, I want to look at another name. And here, please grab this right up front because it's so important. A name that I believe if we don't get an appropriate perspective of, it can cause us to see God the Father through an improper lens. And before I reveal that name, let me just allow God the Father to speak for himself. All the way back to Jeremiah 31:3. This one little power-packed verse opens with, the Lord appeared to us in the past, saying, So before I read how God goes on to describe himself in this text, I want to make something clear here. Did you pick up on that? This isn't the first time people have heard this. It says that God's described himself this way in the past. This is nothing new. And for some of you, this rest of this text might be the most important thing that you're going to hear today. This is the God that gets labeled as angry and judgmental and full of condemnation, who people believe doesn't care about them. But I want you to hear God speak for himself rather than others speak for him. Because God has never changed his narrative, and he has always declared the rest of this verse to us. It goes on to say, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with an unfailing kindness. And if somewhere, folks, along the line you were told or you believe that God is angry or disappointed at you, or maybe you've been told or you believe that all God cares about is keeping you in line while you're here and then judging when you die, I want you to hear directly from the God, the Father of the Old Testament, when he says, I have loved you with an everlasting love. I have drawn you with an unfailing kindness, and that has never changed. And let that sink in deep. So where did God say that in the past prior to this? So in Exodus, we find this other conversation, another encounter with Moses. And last week, I spoke about this prior conversation that God had with Moses at the burning bush, where he informed Moses, I'm here, I'm present, I will be with you, I have chosen you to go set my people free from the slavery of Egypt. And that's exactly what happened. So right before this text I'll get into today, that's exactly what took place. The plagues and the Passover and the parting of the Red Sea. In Exodus 34, the people are heading to the promised land. And God has created two masterful pieces of artwork. Two tablets made of stone, right? He's created the 10 Commandments and he's given them on these beautiful works of art to Moses. And he's told Moses to go and review them with the nation. Now, please hear me on this. These were not given as a list of rules. These were not sort of 10 do's and don'ts. You got to remember, God's people have been slaves for generations. And the 10 Commandments were given to them just simply so that they would know how to live in community together. So that they would know how to treat, because they had been slaves for 400 years. These were just showing them how to respect one another and how to follow God. And Moses comes down from Mount Sinai with those stone tablets that God has forged. And he's just on that mountaintop for a short period of time. But if you know the story, the people have lost their minds while he's gone. You know, it says that they forged an image, a golden calf, an idol, and they're worshiping it. And it uses this word that all-out debauchery is happening, you know, whatever that word means, but I know it's not pretty, right? And Moses comes down from the mountain, and he sees this, and he gets so upset. You guys know what he did? He threw the tablets on the ground. He smashes them to pieces. I mean, I can't imagine what Moses is thinking there, right? Oh, boy, that wasn't a good idea. Like, that's going to probably come back to haunt me, right? So before I read this text, and tell you sort of where God has said this before. Has one of your kids ever done something careless? You know what I mean? They've done something careless, and you just find yourself constantly reminding them of it. You know what I mean? You ever done this? So my daughter, my oldest Alyssa, like, she's a really good driver, but every now and then she's tended to bump into things. You know, just oops, like, oh wait, what's that back there? You know, so we tend to remind her a lot. Like, you know, remember that time that happened, you know, your cousin's car in the driveway? Remember that time? You know, just look around, right? You know, you ever do this with your kids? Well, it seems God also does this. Because in Exodus 34, God's having a conversation with Moses. And in verse 1, it goes like this. The Lord said to Moses, cut for yourself 2 tablets of stone like the first ones, Moses. Remember the ones that I created, remember? And I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets. Remember, Moses, those ones I created, you know, with my own hands. And then I love this, which you broke, right? Which you broke, Moses. Like Moses is probably sitting there himself, yeah, God, I know the ones you're referring to. I've got it. So it goes on, be ready by the morning and come up in the morning to Mount Sinai and present yourself there to me on the top of the mountain. No one shall come up with you, and let no one be seen throughout all the mountain. So Moses, he chisels out 2 new tablets, right? And he went up on the Mount Sinai, and it says in the next few verses that the Lord descends upon him. Literally, it says, passes over him. And God the Father is about to speak for himself as to who he is. And this is what he says to Moses in verse 6. The Lord, a God merciful and gracious. So this is him describing himself, speaking for himself, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love. There it is, in faithfulness. Keeping steadfast love for the thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgressions and sin. And it says, that goes on to say that Moses, in this moment, he bows down and he worships God. And he literally asks God to forgive the people for their foolishness. And God only knows he does that, but he makes a new promise right here. A promise of a homeland. A promise of a land for his people. And he gives them a warning that when they get there, be careful not to be led astray by the gods and the idols of the land. And then in verse 14, he says this, for you shall worship no other God, for the Lord God, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Our God is a jealous God, it says there. And that name for jealous God is this word Elkanah. And when you think of the word jealousy, like what comes to mind? I mean, there's this whole side of it over here when it comes to jealousy. It's almost like this sort of childlike, foolish sort of jealousy. You know what I mean? It's like the middle school boy, gets upset because the girl of his dreams likes his buddy instead, and he gets all jealous. It's like in the movie Toy Story, Woody, gets jealous because of the new toy, Buzz Lightyear, and he kicks him out the window, right? It's this childlike. And Dumb and Dumber, the guys are jealous over the same girl, right? Which leads to the infamous Turbolax scene, right? It's this childlike sort of jealousy. Social media, I think at times, can cause these little twinges of jealousy. Do you know what I mean by this? Because I've said this from up here before, that it's like that we see other people's highlight reels on Facebook. We see their family photos and everything seems so put together. I mean, if I look at one more Thanksgiving dinner this week on Facebook, right? Oh, look at that. Their table is set, beautiful. And you're like, oh, well, I could have done that if I, wanted to, right? Because social media is other people's highlight reels, and we look at our sort of world from almost the behind the scenes, and it causes this little hint of jealousy sometimes. Like, oh, I know like Pinterest is another one, right? You see these ideas on Pinterest for like cakes and settings. You're like, oh, man, my boy deserves a cake like that. I could pull that off. Do you know there's a website out there called Pinterest Fail? You got to check it out because it shows like the Pinterest image of the thing that like they got sort of jealous of and they wanted to create. And then it shows they put up the picture of how theirs turned out. So here's an example. Like here's a Buzz Lightyear cake. I mean, my little boy deserves a Buzz Lightyear cake that looks like that, right? So this woman made one for the party, and hers turned out like this. Yeah, so not so good, right? That's a fail. Jealousy led to a fail there. Here's another cake, a Minion cake. I'm not really familiar with Minion, but what little boy or girl wouldn't want that cake, right? So, she's thinking, or I'm going to make that little cake for and here's how it came out, right? So not so good. And here's one that it came with like a little subtext, and it said that like, rainbow pancakes. I mean, I'm so tired of just serving normal pancakes. How awesome I would be if I would create rainbow pancakes for my family, and here's how it turned out. So jealousy. And we see these things, and we want these things, and we try these things, and sometimes it doesn't work. And there's this whole side of you can take that down now because that's really disgusting. There's this whole side of jealousy that's It's childlike and it's fun and it's innocent, but let's be serious. There's a very dark side of jealousy. It's associated with the words like stalking and rage and temporary losing of your mind, right? Jealousy has caused people to do unthinkable and unspeakable things to one another. On sort of the soft side of that, maybe it's caused some people just to stop talking to one another for years. Maybe, though, it's caused someone to slander or make up stories about a rival. And on the extreme side of jealousy, it's caused people to stalk or harm an ex-girlfriend. A jealous rage can result in a murder-suicide. So when you think of a jealous God, Elkanah, what comes to mind? A God that's obsessed with keeping you in line, and the minute that you step out of line, there's going to be consequences and you're going to pay? Do you think of a God that has established rules for a relationship with him, and if you don't abide, then minimally, you're going to be cast out and left on your own, or possibly stalked and punished by God for breaking his rules? When you even think of the term jealous God, did you think of a God that's angry? You better never break my rules. You better never turn on me. And if so, you better watch your back. Is that the impression of a jealous God of the Old Testament? Because it seems like we see time and time again where this God is sort of allowing or responsible for some destruction for his people that turn. See, I don't believe that. And I believe God reveals his truth about this to us in a living parable found in the Old Testament book of Hosea. So in this time of Hosea, the prophet Hosea, in the time of this book, what was the nation of Israel like? What was happening during the time of the prophet of Hosea? Well, the answer is this: prosperity. I mean, during this time, it's a time of safety and security and thriving at the nation of Israel. But they have also turned from God, and they are worshiping the gods of the neighboring nations. And to sum up sort of what's going on in the land at this time, Hosea 4, verse 2 says this: "There is no faithfulness or steadfast love, and no knowledge of God in the land. There is swearing and lying and murder and stealing and committing adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows bloodshed." And God gave Hosea a much different task than he did other prophets. Most prophets, if you're familiar with the books of the prophets or the prophets of the Old Testament, most prophets were tasked with bringing a message or a warning from God. And typically, it carried a plea for them to stop, to turn, to come back to God the Father. However, Hosea, we find in chapters 1, 2, and 3, is asked to do something completely different. Folks, Hosea is asked by God to live out before the people what God was experiencing, to become a living parable about God. So what was Hosea's task? God told him to go marry an adulterous woman, a prostitute. God told Hosea, "I want you to go marry someone that has sex for money with other men and bring her home and make her your own." And he does. Hosea goes and marries a prostitute named Gomer. That's an unfortunate name for a gal, right? That's what the scripture says that they have 3 children together. And you would think that this is going to be like the movie Pretty Woman, right? Richard Gere falls in love with Julia Gomer Roberts, and she says, "Oh, he loves me," and they live happily ever after. That's not what happens. Gomer does not find comfort and rest in Hosea's love. She finds boredom and tedium and monotony. And she finds this is not enough, and she goes back and becomes a prostitute again. Maybe it's the money or the attention or the gifts, but whatever it is, she leaves her husband and her children. And God comes back to Hosea. And don't you think God, should have sort of said to Hosea, okay, Hosea, you did what I asked, and you tried, and you brought her home, and you loved her, and you provided for her, and it didn't work, so you're released from this marriage. No, that's not what God does. God tells Hosea to go get her. And in chapter 3, we even see that Hosea had to spend quite a bit to purchase her back out of whatever arrangement, or ownership situation that she had found herself in. And then God adds to Hosea, I don't want you just to take her back. He instructed Hosea to love her. God wanted Hosea's love to win her back. Folks, that would be a very humbling task, wouldn't it? See, Hosea was asked to be a physical display of the story of God to humanity. Through Hosea, God is saying, I need people to see I am a jealous God, and I've loved them with an everlasting love, and they have forever walked away from me and sold themselves to other gods. Hosea is a living parable of God's love for us, and in that parable, we are Gomer. We have walked away and placed other priorities and idols and gods before our God. And Hosea is God. And he returns time after time after time, not with punishment, to purchase us back and to try to win us back with his love. And, I studied this book at the tail end of summer. It sort of was my quiet time book that I studied. And chapters 4 through 14 are basically sermons. They are basically Hosea speaking on God's behalf, trying to get the people to understand his jealousy and to return. And I read these chapters, in my quiet time. And as I read them, I almost sort of as I read them, I discovered that God did indeed seem really angry. I mean, when I was reading chapters 4 through 14, I saw a God that seemed very judgmental and seemed very, very angry and jealous. Like, for an example, I'll put a couple here. Hosea 8, verse 3. Israel has spurned the good. The enemy shall pursue them. They made kings, but not through me. They set up princes, but I knew not. With their silver and gold, they made idols for their own destruction. Hosea 10:13. You have plowed iniquity. You have reaped injustice. You have eaten the fruit of lies. And because you have trusted in your own way and in the multitude of your warriors, therefore the tumult of war shall arise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be destroyed. That sounds like an angry God. And in my quiet time, I heard God sort of say, read it differently. Read it as if I'm a jealous God. And the way I read the same verses was this way, Hosea 8:3. Israel has spurned the good, and the enemy's going to rise and pursue them, and they have made kings, but not through me. They have set up princes, but I didn't even know. And with their silver and gold, they have made idols, but they're going to be for their destruction. A jealous God speaks this in chapter 10, verse 13. That you have plowed iniquity, and you have reaped injustice. You have eaten and believed lies. Because you have trusted in your own ways and in your own armies, man, the tumult of war is going to rise among your people, and all your fortresses, they're going to be destroyed. That's a jealous God. See, when we read it that way, I believe it reveals the nature of Elkanah, who's a jealous God that is pleading for us to know him. What God is saying is, you can run, and you can run, and you can run from my love, but I'm not going to stop pursuing you. And my hope is that one day you're going to be exhausted from running from my love, and you will finally stop and let my love capture you. See, on Christmas, God made a radical move of jealousy in the pursuit of us, and he came in human form, Jesus, to reveal who he was. He was tired of being misrepresented and misunderstood, and through Christ, he revealed he was indeed merciful and gracious, and slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, because God has not changed. And then in Luke 15, there's this story that Jesus, he is eating with a group of people. And it says that some of the religious leaders of this day, they were called Pharisees. They take note of who he's eating with, and they begin to mutter about him eating with sinners. And these folks that Jesus was eating with, these very well could have been maybe some folks involved in some pretty serious debauchery, far from God. But also in this group, there's probably some people that are just trying to figure out who God is. They're struggling with following this God. And Jesus, he decides to tell them a story, a parable. And here's the story. He talks about a father that has two sons. And the youngest son, and this is in Luke 15, he comes up to his dad and he says, "Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me." His dad did this. His dad divided the property between them. And not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. Now let me unpack a couple things here. In this culture, and to the Pharisees, and even to the sinners that were sitting listening to this story that Jesus was speaking to, the youngest son would have come as a request that would have struck the dad like a dagger in the heart. The youngest son's request is basically saying, I want nothing to do with you forever. I want my inheritance now. The part that's coming to me when you die, I want it right now. What the youngest son is basically saying is, to me, you're nothing, Father. You have no authority or say in my life. It says that he gathered up that money and he squandered it. You know, and a famine hits the area and he is virtually starving to death. So one scripture says that he comes to his senses and he starts to have this conversation in his mind because he's starving to death. And he says, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I'm going to arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as if I was just a hired servant. And he arose and he came to his father. And Jesus, I think, sort of paused there. Because the folks listening to this story are like, oh man, what is this dad going to do to him? And I think most likely they think that this father, he's not even going to see this kid. He's going to have him stopped at the gate and thrown off of his property. And if the father will even sort of have a face-to-face or a talk with him to uphold his family honor, surely he's going to publicly humiliate that kid. See, in this culture, those choices would have been expected and acceptable by a respected father of this region. But instead, the unexpected happens. See, and I'm convinced that the whole gospel, the initiation of the entire gospel is found in this little single word, this little conjunction, but. Because the next verse says about this encounter is verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, the Father sees him. The word but there tells us something's about to happen that's going to change our thinking. We have to rethink something here. This is a reversal. Something contrary is about to happen. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. And he ran and embraced him and he kissed him. And the son, he started to do this speech that he had rehearsed. I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the dad just cuts him off. The father says to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him and put the ring on his hand and shoes on his feet and bring a fattened calf and kill it and let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost, but he is found. And they began to celebrate. What did the father do? The father ran to him. See, in a Middle Eastern culture at this time, a man of mature years, he would always walk. It would be a way to show that he was dignified. In a Middle Eastern culture, men at this time would walk slowly and upright to show that they deserve respect. Because, see, if he were to run in this culture, he would have to lift up his garments and literally expose his undergarments to run. And that would be nothing that a man would do. That would be undignified and simply not done in public. But with the entire town watching, that's what he does. See, and the boy, he should have received harsh words, but instead he received kisses. He should have received a whip across his back, but instead he receives the best robe, one that's set aside for a dignitary. He should have been stripped of his family name, but he receives a signet ring to put on his finger, which reinstates his authority in the family. The servants were barefoot, but his son was to wear sandals. Meat or a fattened calf, it would have been a rare delicacy of this time. But they were celebrating the return of an honored guest who was lost but now is found. These are all indicators of a jealous God. The father was out on the road that day daily, I believe, waiting for the return of his son. That's a jealous God. Our God did not wait in heaven for us to come to our senses. He closed the gap, he shortened the distance, and he sent Jesus on a Christmas rescue mission. That is Elkanah. Our God is a jealous God that does not come at you in the form of anger and condemnation. Elkanah pursues you out of love and pleads with you to return. That baby born in that manger grew to reveal the Father's love to us by bearing our shame and our humility and our sin on that cross. And that is one incredible, jealous God that would reveal his love that way to us. So my question to you is this simply today: where are you today with that jealous God? Where are you? Were you once a believer, but you allowed others to speak for God, and they turned you away? Has your life been filled with so much just mess and wreckage that you believe that there's no way a jealous God could have anything to do with you? Or have you led your life in such a way that you do what you want and when you want to who you want? You don't think you need a God, but you know there's something missing. You know there's something not right. Folks, he will not stop pursuing you. He is a relentless and jealous God. And is today the day to stop and listen to the voice of Elkanah pleading with you for your return? Because I believe he is out on that road daily waiting for you to come home. And he has a kiss and a robe and a ring and a feast. However, there's that really powerful little word there. But it's your decision. Because our God's a gentleman. He's not going to force anything on you. The decision is always yours. Across all of our campuses, will you stand up with me? I'm going to also ask whoever your campus leader is to just come on up front, whether that's up on the platform or just up to the front of your room where you're worshiping. I just want to say a prayer. I'm going to lead us in a prayer. You can use my words, you can use your words. But if you're exhausted, maybe today is the day to stop and just allow God's love to capture you. So we bow our heads and pray across all campuses with no one looking around, just this sort of moment that we create here at Northway. I'm going to say a prayer. You can use my words, you can use yours. If this is what you want to do today, if you want to stop, if you want to turn, if you want to yield your heart to Jesus, it just goes something like this. Father God, thank you for pursuing me. Thank you for sending your Son. God, I'm exhausted from running. And right here today, I want to make a marker that I'm going to stop and turn my life over to you. And I'm going to begin to follow you. And if you just said that prayer with all of our heads bowed across all of our campuses, it's just something, again, simple we do at Northway. All I want you to do is just look up towards the front. Your campus pastor will be there.